The Bank of Canada has spent months systematically cutting its benchmark interest rate to provide economic relief. Logic dictates that homes in British Columbia should be getting easier to afford, yet buyers are still finding themselves entirely priced out of the market. To understand why, we have to look at the central bank's policy roller coaster. Between 2024 and mid-2025, borrowing costs hit a punishing peak of 5% to cool down post-pandemic inflation. By the start of 2026, the bank brought that rate down, but it hit a hard floor at 2.25%. It paused at that level because of emerging global risks. Renewed trade tariffs from the US and international oil supply shocks are threatening to drive consumer prices back up, forcing the central bank to hold the line to keep inflation in check. But national monetary policy only exists in the abstract. Real estate decisions happen in the physical world, usually over a kitchen table covered in tax forms and a calculator. When families sit down to do the math, they discover a frustrating reality. A massive reduction in the national borrowing rate has yielded exactly zero additional purchasing power for their specific household budget. The headline policy rate makes for good news broadcasts, but the actual mechanics of securing a BC mortgage operate on a separate, hidden set of mathematical rules. The first mathematical barrier is behavioral. Sellers anchor their asking prices to the absolute market peak of 2023. Unless they face severe financial distress, they refuse to accept lower offers, creating a dynamic economists call sticky pricing. This table summarizes the provincial housing forecast for 2026. Looking specifically at the BC total row at the bottom, we see the average MLS price dropping from just over $953,000 in 2025 down to under $940,000. That represents a microscopic 1.4% decline in a market defined by soaring inventory. Connecting a willing buyer with one of those stubborn sellers requires navigating a regulatory checkpoint known as the OSFI mortgage stress test. Federal regulators require lenders to prove that you can handle future economic shocks. They evaluate your finances against a strict benchmark, the greater of 5.25%, or whatever your actual contract rate is, plus 2 full percentage points. So if a bank offers you a solid 5-year fixed rate of 4.29%, the stress test immediately inflates that number. You have to prove you have the income to survive payments at 6.29%. That severe 2% buffer strips away thousands of dollars in borrowing capacity. This is exactly why aggressive central bank rate cuts haven't unlocked housing affordability on the ground. Prospective buyers are only half the equation. The other half involves current homeowners who secured their mortgages during the pandemic and are now marching toward their mandatory renewal dates in late 2026 and 2027. These households are transitioning off ultra-low fixed rates, often around 1.99%, and into a market where standard renewals sit closer to 4.5%. On an average $400,000 mortgage, that shift injects over $1,000 directly into a family's monthly housing expenses. For many households, absorbing an extra $12,000 a year means a sudden 40 to 60% increase in their debt obligations. Confronted with this math, owners have two options to avoid defaulting. They can stretch their mortgage amortizations out to 30 or 35 years to dilute the monthly pain, or they can quietly list the property for sale. With over 150,000 BC households facing this payment jump, the resulting inventory pressure acts as a more direct driver of market movement than any individual Bank of Canada announcement. This leaves today's buyer in a precarious position. You need to structure a massive loan right now, while planning for an influx of inventory and potentially lower rates over the next 24 months. Locking into a traditional 5-year fixed mortgage traps you with harsh penalties if you need to refinance or sell early. Conversely, choosing a variable rate leaves your monthly budget completely exposed to unexpected inflation shocks. A 3-year fixed mortgage serves as a strategic bridge. It locks in your payment to weather the immediate uncertainty, then matures right as economic models project long-term borrowing costs will stabilize at a lower baseline. In 2026, a mortgage term provides the most value through long-term flexibility, prioritizing the ability to renegotiate over securing the absolute lowest introductory rate today. Navigating this paradox requires completing a specific mathematical checklist before you ever attend an open house or look at a real estate listing. First, secure a 120-day rate hold. This costs nothing and forms a defensive shield around your purchasing power if bond yields suddenly spike before you close. Second, establish a strict personal carry limit. The maximum amount the bank calculates you can survive under the stress test is almost always higher than the amount you can actually afford while maintaining a normal life. Third, time your purchase ahead of the 2027 inventory turnover and use British Columbia's mandatory 3-day rescission period purely as an emergency backstop for major property defects, not as a crutch for buyer's remorse.